Have you ever noticed how some men stay inconsistent no matter how hard they try, while others become disciplined once and never lose it? It isn't ambition that separates them. It isn't talent. Most men were trained to rely on the wrong forces. Motivation, inspiration, comfort, hope. These sound intelligent, civilized, and that's exactly why they fail. They make discipline dependent on mood, and anything that depends on mood eventually collapses. Machiavelli described this as one of the harshest laws of human nature, a law that quietly rewards self-control and discards everyone who lacks it. You've watched it play out your entire life, even if you didn't have words for it. Men don't fall behind because they lack desire. They fall behind because their discipline breaks under pressure. If you learn to master these 8 laws, the same force that destroys most men becomes what separates you from them. It's the line between effort and control. By the end of this video, you won't think about discipline the same way again. You'll see why disciplined men separate themselves early, and why once these laws are installed, hesitation disappears and consistency becomes automatic. You'll know exactly which law you've been violating and what changes when discipline stops being something you try to summon and becomes something that governs you. Discipline is not built on motivation or inspiration, and most men misunderstand it completely. Because motivation fades and inspiration lies, and while they wait to feel ready, they are quietly replaced by men who act without feeling anything at all. You have watched this happen in real time. You set rules for yourself and break them without consequence. You promise mornings and surrender at night. You delay, excuse, rationalize, and call it strategy. What you call flexibility is weakness, rehearsed. What you call rest is avoidance dressed in comfort. You live inside a loop where nothing truly changes, because nothing truly costs you. And as long as failure is painless, it will remain familiar. You already sense the truth you avoid admitting, the one that tightens your chest when you think about the years slipping by without resistance. Discipline only appears when something is at stake, when loss is real and personal, when comfort is no longer protected. Discipline is built on fear of consequence, not fear of pain inflicted by others, but fear of what happens when you tolerate your own collapse. Fear of being exposed as undisciplined by the only judge that matters, the future version of you who will live inside the results of today's decisions. Men fail at discipline because their actions carry no immediate punishment. Miss the workout and nothing breaks. Delay the work and no one notices. Break the promise and life continues as if nothing happened. This absence of consequence trains your nervous system to relax into betrayal. You teach yourself that words mean nothing and rules are optional. Over time, this rewires your identity. You become someone who expects escape routes, someone who assumes forgiveness from themselves before discipline ever has a chance to form. Where there is no cost, there is no respect for structure. Fear is not the enemy of discipline. Softness is. Fear sharpens attention. Fear compresses time. Fear forces action when comfort would otherwise sedate you. When consequence is real, behavior aligns automatically. You do not debate gravity before stepping off a cliff. You do not negotiate with fire, yet you negotiate endlessly with your own decay, because you have insulated yourself from the consequences of delay. Remove that insulation and watch how fast clarity returns. Fear does not weaken you when it is directed inward. It stabilizes you. This is why men who appear naturally disciplined are not superior in character. They are superior in consequence design. They attach pain to failure and relief to execution. They do not rely on desire, they rely on inevitability. Miss the standard and something valuable is lost. Break the rule and discomfort follows immediately. Over time, the body learns faster than the mind ever could. Discipline becomes reflex, not effort. Structure replaces emotion. Action replaces intention. Every empire understands this principle instinctively. Laws are not written to inspire virtue. They are written to enforce behavior. The moment rules lose consequence, disorder follows. Your internal world is no different. If you violate your own standards and nothing happens, your mind learns that you are not to be taken seriously. It stops responding to commands issued in moments of ambition. Your goals become decorative. Your routines become symbolic. You live in a state of permanent negotiation, because no line is ever final. You are not undisciplined because you lack strength. You are undisciplined because you have protected yourself from consequence. You have made failure safe. You have made delay survivable. You have made weakness negotiable. The moment you reverse that, the moment failure costs you something you care about, behavior will reorganize without negotiation. The question is not whether fear works. The question is what you are willing to put at risk to force yourself to obey. Every collapse begins with a conversation you should never have. A quiet debate inside your head, where discipline is put on trial, and comfort argues its case like a seasoned lawyer. You know this voice intimately. It waits for fatigue, for doubt, for boredom. It does not attack directly. It negotiates, just this once, just today. Adjust the standard, lower the cost, delay the action. And each time you listen, something subtle happens. Authority shifts. The part of you that gives orders loses credibility, and the part of you that resists learns it can win without force. This is the moment where most men permanently lose control, because the instant you begin bargaining with weakness, you legitimize it. Never negotiate with your weaker self. The weaker self does not seek balance or sustainability. It seeks survival and comfort. It will agree to anything in the future as long as it can escape the present. It promises obedience tomorrow to steal obedience today, and it never pays its debts. Negotiation implies equality. It assumes both sides deserve a seat at the table. But weakness is not a partner. It is an insurgent force that grows stronger every time you treat it as reasonable. The disciplined mind understands hierarchy. Orders flow downward. When fatigue speaks, it is acknowledged but not obeyed. When doubt arises, it is observed but not consulted. The moment you ask your weaker self for permission, you place it above command, and command cannot survive that inversion. You mistake negotiation for intelligence because it feels thoughtful. You tell yourself you are being strategic, adaptive, humane. In reality, you are rehearsing surrender. Each compromise becomes precedent. Each exception becomes policy. Over time, the rules dissolve into suggestions, and suggestions are ignored. This is how identity erodes without drama, not through catastrophe, but through small, reasonable conversations that end with you standing still. Strong systems do not negotiate with internal threats. A state does not debate with mutiny. An army does not poll its deserters. Control is maintained by clarity, not consensus. When the order is given, execution follows regardless of mood. This is not cruelty. It is survival logic. Your internal world operates under the same law. If every command is subject to discussion, none of them are real. You live in permanent hesitation, ruled by the loudest impulse of the moment. The weaker self is patient. It understands timing. It waits until you are tired, hungry, overstimulated, or emotionally drained. Then it presents its case calmly, rationally, almost kindly. Skip today. Adjust the plan. You deserve relief. And if you give in, it learns exactly how to win next time. Discipline does not fail in moments of chaos. It fails in moments of comfort, where you believe you can afford to listen. Command must be absolute to function. This does not mean you ignore reality. It means you decide standards in advance and execute them without debate when the moment arrives. Decisions are made once, not repeatedly. The order was given earlier, when you were clear. Now is not the time for discussion. Now is the time for obedience. This single shift removes friction permanently. No internal war, no exhaustion, just action. Every time you refuse to negotiate, authority consolidates. The weaker voice still appears, but it loses influence. It learns it is irrelevant. Over time it quiets. Not because it is defeated, but because it is ignored. Control is restored, not through force, but through consistency. The question that remains is simple and uncomfortable. When weakness speaks next time, will you treat it as an equal, or will you finally strip it of a voice? You were taught to believe discipline is an act of will, a daily battle of character, where the strong force themselves forward and the weak fall away. This belief is convenient, flattering even, because it allows failure to feel noble. You tell yourself you just didn't have enough willpower today, as if willpower were a muscle that betrayed you, not a story you cling to. But look closely at your life, and you will see the pattern. On days when structure exists, action follows effortlessly. On days when structure dissolves, you hesitate, drift, and decay. The problem was never strength. The problem was that you placed control in the most unreliable place possible. Willpower is emotional. It depends on mood, energy, sleep, hunger, stimulation, and belief. It fluctuates constantly. Systems do not. Systems operate regardless of how you feel. They do not ask if you are motivated. They do not care if you are tired. They move because they were designed to move. Systems beat willpower every time. The disciplined man does not wake up and decide who he will be today. He already decided, and the system executes on his behalf. Men fail because they rely on themselves in moments when they are least qualified to lead. You ask a tired mind to make long-term decisions. You ask a distracted body to resist comfort. You ask a stressed nervous system to choose pain over relief. This is not discipline, this is sabotage disguised as virtue. When you rely on willpower, you put the weakest version of yourself in charge at the exact moment authority matters most. Look at any environment where discipline appears effortless, and you will find invisible rails guiding behavior, uniform schedules, fixed rituals, automatic consequences. There is no room for debate because there is no need for it. The system decides, the individual follows. This is why environments outperform intentions every time. Change the structure and behavior changes without resistance. Remove the structure, and even strong intentions collapse into entropy. You think discipline should feel hard because you have been trained to associate effort with value. But true discipline feels cold, efficient, and unremarkable. There is no internal struggle because the decision was removed earlier. The system tells you where to be, what to do, and when to do it. There is no question of whether you feel like it. That question no longer exists. Freedom is not found in choice. It is found in removing choice from situations where you are predictably weak. Willpower fails silently. It exhausts you without visible damage, then disappears when you need it most. Systems fail loudly, which is why they are superior. When a system breaks, you notice immediately. When willpower breaks, you rationalize. You call it rest. You call it balance. You call it being human. Systems expose failure. Willpower hides it, and what is hidden cannot be corrected. This is why men who claim to be disciplined but lack systems are constantly tired. They are fighting themselves every day. They wake up already depleted because they know another internal negotiation is coming. Another moment where they must summon strength from nothing. Over time, this erodes identity. You stop trusting yourself because you know your obedience is conditional. You begin planning your life around your weaknesses instead of neutralizing them. A system does not inspire you, it traps you. It creates narrow corridors where only correct behavior fits. Miss the action and friction appears immediately. Follow the path and progress accumulates automatically. This is not rigidity. This is leverage. You are not becoming less human by doing this. You are acknowledging human limits and designing around them, instead of pretending they don't exist. Men who master systems are not more disciplined in spirit. They are more honest about their flaws. They assume future weakness and prepare for it in advance. They do not trust motivation. They do not trust emotion. They trust architecture. And architecture, once built, enforces behavior long after the builder is tired, distracted, or afraid. If your discipline collapses the moment you are stressed, bored, or overstimulated, you do not need more willpower. You need fewer decisions. You need systems that close exits before temptation appears. Until then, every promise you make to yourself is provisional, dependent on mood, energy, and circumstance. And the question that should disturb you now is this: if your discipline depends on how you feel, what happens the day your feelings finally turn against you? You believe discipline should feel intense, that it should be fueled by emotion, anger, hunger, desire, or vision. You wait to feel driven before you act, and when that feeling fades, so does your consistency. This is why your discipline spikes briefly and then disappears. Emotion is volatile, it burns hot and dies fast. The mistake is thinking discipline is meant to feel meaningful in the moment. In reality, the more emotion you attach to action, the more fragile that action becomes. When emotion is absent, most men stop. When emotion is removed, the disciplined man continues. What you have not been told is that identity is not formed by passion, but by pattern. The mind believes what the body repeats. Repetition, without emotion, creates identity. This is the mechanism most men never touch. When you act without feeling, without hype, without internal drama, the action bypasses debate and writes itself directly into who you are. The behavior becomes neutral, then normal, then unquestioned. Identity follows repetition, not intention. Men fail here because they crave meaning while acting. They want to feel aligned, inspired, validated by the moment. But discipline does not care how you feel about it. The soldier does not require emotion to stand watch. The craftsman does not need passion to sharpen his tools. Repetition done coldly, almost mechanically, is what creates reliability. Emotion introduces fluctuation. Fluctuation introduces inconsistency, and inconsistency prevents identity from ever solidifying. Look closely at what you call your habits. They are fragile because they depend on mood. When you feel strong, you act. When you feel weak, you pause. This teaches your mind that action is optional and conditional. Over time, the behavior never becomes automatic. It always requires effort, always requires motivation, always requires a reason, and anything that requires a reason can be abandoned when a better excuse appears. Repetition without emotion removes choice. You do not ask yourself if today matters. You do not assess how you feel. You execute because that is what happens at that time, in that place. There is no story attached, no identity performance, no internal applause, just action performed the same way every time. This neutrality is what allows behavior to sink beneath consciousness and become reflex. The moment action becomes reflex, discipline stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like gravity. Identity is not something you claim, it is something others observe over time. You are what you do when no one is watching and nothing feels urgent. When your actions are boring, uncelebrated and repetitive, they carry the most weight. This is how disciplined men are formed quietly, without transformation arcs or dramatic turning points. There is no day where it clicks. There is no surge of confidence. There is only accumulation. Emotion feels powerful because it is loud. Repetition feels weak because it is silent. But silence builds permanence. The mind adapts to what is repeated without resistance. The body adjusts to what is expected without discussion. When repetition is stripped of emotion, it becomes predictable. Predictability becomes trust. Trust becomes identity. This is why men who rely on emotional intensity burn out, while men who rely on routine outlast everyone. You think removing emotion will make life dull. In reality, it removes chaos. It removes the exhausting inner dialogue. It removes the constant assessment of whether today is different. When action is neutral, it is easier to execute. When it is easier to execute, it happens more often. When it happens more often, it defines you. Discipline stops being something you summon and becomes something you express without effort. This is also why public declarations and internal hype are dangerous. They inject emotion where none is needed. They create performance instead of process. The disciplined man does not announce his intentions. He repeats his actions until intention is irrelevant. He does not need to believe he is disciplined. He proves it through unremarkable consistency that does not fluctuate with confidence or doubt. If your discipline disappears the moment you feel flat, bored, or uninspired, it was never discipline. It was emotion borrowing discipline's name. Strip the feeling away and see what remains. Because the identity you are building is not defined by how you feel on your best days, but by what you repeat on your most indifferent ones. And the question you should be forced to answer now is this: if emotion were removed completely, would anything you claim to be disciplined about still exist? You have been taught that self-kindness is a virtue, that progress requires patience, and that discipline must be balanced with compassion. This belief feels civilized, humane, modern. It is also the reason your standards keep collapsing. Every time you fail yourself, you soften the response. You explain, you forgive, you move on without consequence. What you call mercy is simply avoidance of discomfort, and each act of mercy trains your mind to expect escape. Over time, failure stops feeling dangerous, and discipline loses all authority. There is a point where kindness becomes sabotage, where understanding turns into permission. Cut mercy toward yourself, not because cruelty is noble, but because mercy without consequence destroys structure. A ruler who pardons every violation invites rebellion. A commander who excuses disobedience loses command. Your internal world follows the same logic. When you fail and nothing happens, your standards become suggestions. When standards are optional, identity erodes. Men collapse because they treat self-betrayal gently. Miss the standard and you soothe yourself. Break the rule and you reassure yourself. Delay the work and you promise to do better tomorrow. This trains your nervous system to associate failure with comfort instead of cost. Over time, failure becomes attractive. It offers relief. It offers softness. It offers escape. Discipline cannot survive in an environment where betrayal is rewarded with understanding. Mercy feels moral because it reduces tension in the moment. But discipline is not concerned with momentary peace. It is concerned with long-term control. Every time you spare yourself discomfort after failure, you weaken the signal. You tell yourself that the rules do not matter as much as your feelings. Eventually, the mind stops respecting any command that can be undone with an apology. Authority dissolves quietly, without conflict, without resistance. This does not mean self-hatred, it means precision. When a rule is broken, the response must be immediate and unmistakable. Something is lost, something changes. The body must learn that deviation carries weight. This is how order is maintained in every functional system, not through rage, not through shame, but through consistency. Mercy interrupts consistency. It creates loopholes, and loopholes are where discipline goes to die. You fear that removing mercy will make you rigid or extreme. In truth, it makes you stable. Predictable consequence removes emotional volatility. You no longer spiral, you no longer negotiate, you simply correct. The response is clean, the lesson is clear, the system holds. Discipline does not require cruelty, but it cannot coexist with indulgence. One erodes the other by definition. Look at the areas where you are weakest, and you will find softness disguised as wisdom. You tell yourself you are being realistic. You tell yourself life is hard. You tell yourself balance matters. These are not lies, but they are misused. Reality does not care how gently you explain your failures. Balance does not reward repeated betrayal. Life does not slow down because you chose comfort over command. The cost accumulates whether you acknowledge it or not. Men who become disciplined do not enjoy punishment. They respect it. They understand that consequence is the language the body listens to when words no longer work. The moment mercy is removed, behavior sharpens, clarity returns, the system stabilizes. Discipline stops slipping through your fingers because there is nowhere left to hide. Failure becomes uncomfortable again, and discomfort is corrective. If every time you break your own rules you respond with understanding instead of consequence, you are not being kind to yourself. You are training yourself to be unreliable. And the question that should corner you now is this: when you fail next time, will you protect your comfort again, or will you finally protect your authority? You have been warned against pride your entire life. You were told it makes men reckless, blinds them, turns them brittle. So you learned to suppress it, to soften your victories, to downplay your standards. You learned to shrink yourself so you would not appear arrogant, demanding, or severe. In doing so, you stripped yourself of one of the most powerful tools for self-control. A man without pride has no internal territory to defend. When nothing feels sacred, nothing is protected. Discipline collapses, not because effort is too hard, but because identity is too weak to enforce it. There is a reason fallen men abandon standards quickly. They no longer feel worthy of them. Pride, when sharpened and directed inward, becomes a guard at the gate. It draws a line around who you are and what you tolerate. It makes violation feel personal, not emotional, but insulting. When pride is active, certain behaviors become beneath you, and when something feels beneath you, you do not debate it, you refuse it instinctively. Men fail because they attempt discipline from a position of humility. They treat themselves as flexible, negotiable, adaptable. They assume they can always recover later. Pride does the opposite. Pride compresses identity. It says this is who I am, and anything outside this boundary is unacceptable. Not because it is difficult, but because it is degrading. Discipline enforced by pride does not require effort. It requires allegiance. You misunderstand pride because you associate it with ego and display. But the most dangerous pride is silent. It does not announce itself. It does not posture. It simply refuses to lower standards. When pride is present, excuses feel embarrassing. Delay feels shameful. Inconsistency feels like self-disrespect. This is not moral judgment. It is structural integrity. Pride is the internal mechanism that makes discipline non-negotiable because identity is at stake. A man without pride can be reasoned into weakness. A man with pride cannot. He may be tired, he may be frustrated, he may be tempted, but he will not cross certain lines, because crossing them would fracture his self-image. This is how pride stabilizes behavior. It removes choice by attaching actions to identity. You are no longer deciding what to do, you are defending who you are. This is why discipline collapses in men who define themselves loosely. If you are anything, you stand for nothing. Pride sharpens definition. It narrows the self until it becomes firm. This firmness creates resistance. When temptation appears, it does not meet curiosity. It meets contempt. When laziness whispers, it is dismissed as unworthy of response. Pride does not argue. It disqualifies. You were taught to fear becoming rigid. In reality, rigidity is strength when the structure is correct. Pride gives discipline its spine. Without it, systems decay, consequences soften, repetition loses meaning. Pride binds all previous laws together. It enforces consequence. It silences negotiation. It protects systems. It sustains repetition. Remove pride, and discipline becomes a chore. Activate it, and discipline becomes self-respect in motion. The future you are becoming is shaped by what you allow today. Pride forces you to ask a question that cuts through every excuse and every delay. Is this behavior worthy of the man I am claiming to be, or does it expose the truth I have been avoiding? Every collapse begins small, not with rebellion, not with defiance, but with permission. A rule bent slightly, a standard relaxed just once, a line crossed without consequence. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that it's minor, that you'll correct it later. But discipline does not decay through catastrophe. It rots through tolerance. The moment you allow a small breach, you signal that boundaries are negotiable. And once that signal is sent, the structure begins to weaken invisibly. What you excuse today becomes what you accept tomorrow. Small violations are treason, not because they are dramatic, but because they undermine authority at its root. A single unpunished breach teaches your system that rules can be broken without collapse. It does not matter how insignificant the violation appears. What matters is that command was challenged and nothing happened. Authority cannot survive that lesson. Men fail because they measure violations by outcome instead of signal. They ask whether damage was done, whether progress was lost, whether anyone noticed. This is the wrong measure. The true damage occurs internally, in the relationship between command and obedience. Each small violation trains your mind to wait for permission to disobey again. It erodes respect for structure. Over time, the rules remain written, but no longer enforced. Every disciplined system treats minor breaches with the same seriousness as major ones, because it understands what is at stake. Order is psychological before it is physical. Once discipline senses weakness, it exploits it relentlessly. A missed action becomes a missed day. A missed day becomes a pattern becomes identity. By the time collapse is visible, authority has already been gone for a long time. You believe you are being reasonable by allowing small exceptions. In reality, you are teaching yourself that standards are symbolic, that they exist to be interpreted, not obeyed. Discipline does not collapse because the goal was too hard. It collapses because the rules were not sacred. When rules are sacred, they are enforced without calculation. When they are profane, they are debated until they dissolve. Small violations feel harmless because they do not hurt immediately. That is what makes them dangerous. They bypass alarm systems. They slip past attention. They disguise themselves as flexibility, intelligence, realism. But flexibility without hierarchy becomes chaos. Intelligence without discipline becomes paralysis. Realism without enforcement becomes surrender. Discipline survives only when every breach, no matter how small, is treated as a threat to command. This is why strong men appear severe over details that others ignore. They understand that details are not small. They are the terrain where authority lives or dies. When you correct immediately, you preserve structure. When you delay correction, you invite decay. There is no neutral ground. Every violation either strengthens discipline through enforcement or weakens it through tolerance. You do not lose discipline all at once. You give it away in fragments. One ignored alarm, one skipped action, one quiet exception you promise not to repeat. Each one feels insignificant. Together they form a pattern of betrayal that no amount of motivation can reverse. Discipline does not forgive treason because treason spreads. If you were forced to audit your life honestly, you would find that your greatest failures were not caused by massive decisions, but by small violations you chose not to correct. And the question that should make you uneasy now is this: which small act of disobedience are you tolerating today that is already preparing your next collapse? You want discipline to be sustainable, humane, balanced. You want it to fit neatly into your life without demanding too much or costing too much. This desire is understandable, and it is precisely why discipline never lasts. Anything that must constantly compromise to survive is already dying. Discipline that negotiates with comfort slowly dissolves into routine, then into intention, then into memory. What remains is the same cycle you have lived in for years: effort followed by collapse, standards followed by erosion, resolve followed by excuse. There is a final truth most men avoid because it leaves no room for fantasy. Discipline must be ruthless or it will be permanent. Ruthless does not mean violent or chaotic. It means uncompromising. It means there are no exceptions that matter more than command. Discipline either dominates behavior completely or becomes a temporary phase you revisit whenever guilt returns. There is no middle state. Partial discipline does not stabilize, it decays. Men fail because they believe they can soften discipline once it is established. They imagine a future where structure relaxes and control remains. This never happens. The moment ruthlessness fades, erosion begins. Discipline is not maintained by memory or pride alone. It is maintained by constant pressure. Remove the pressure and entropy returns. Not immediately, but inevitably. Discipline that is not enforced daily becomes ceremonial, something you talk about instead of live. You fear ruthlessness because you associate it with burnout. But burnout comes from inconsistency, not severity. Ruthless discipline eliminates negotiation, emotion, and decision fatigue. It simplifies life into execution. There is no internal war because the outcome is already decided. The mind rests because it no longer debates. The body adapts because it no longer waits. What feels extreme at first becomes normal once resistance disappears. Permanent weakness is far more brutal than temporary severity. A life spent half disciplined is a life spent half frustrated, always aware of what you could be but never arriving. Ruthless discipline ends this tension. It draws a line that cannot be crossed. On one side is action, on the other is decay. There is no confusion, no ambiguity, no false hope, only structure and result. This is why discipline must be enforced even when it feels excessive, unnecessary, or unfair. Discipline is not designed to feel fair. It is designed to work. The disciplined man does not ask whether the rule is pleasant today. He asks whether the rule preserves command. If it does, it stands. If it does not, it is removed. Sentiment is irrelevant. Outcome is everything. You cannot flirt with discipline and expect loyalty from it. Discipline rewards total allegiance. The moment you offer it conditions, it withdraws its power. You are left with habits that obey only when convenient and standards that collapse under pressure. Ruthlessness is the price of permanence. Without it, discipline becomes a visitor in your life instead of a resident. If you are honest, you already know where you soften, where you excuse, where you pull back, just before the standard becomes absolute. That is the point where discipline ends and weakness begins. And the question you cannot escape now is this: are you willing to be ruthless enough to end the cycle permanently? Or will you continue choosing comfort and calling it control? If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you already knows this truth. Discipline is not motivation, it is domination. It is the ability to command yourself without negotiation, without emotion, without mercy. Most men fail not because they lack desire, but because they refuse to become ruthless with themselves. Now tell me in the comments, are you ready to stop bargaining with weakness? Are you willing to enforce discipline even when no one is watching, no one is praising, and no one cares? If this message touched you, if it made sense, write in the comments, I enforce discipline. Let's see how many here are truly ready to become unbreakable. And don't forget, keep watching the next video. It's important, much more than you imagine. See you there.